It starts with a whisper, not a war cry. A handful of riders, dust-stained, sunburned, silent, move ahead the Roman legions long before the eagle standards ever appear on the horizon. They're not conquerors, not yet. They're the eyes and the ears of the empire. And in the shadows of mountains, forests, and foreign cities, Rome builds its victories long before the battle begins. Rome didn't conquer the world by luck, it conquered it with intelligence. So, let's rewind. By the 1st century BC, Roman Empire had no satellite imagery, no spy planes, no encrypted radio. Yet it controlled a territory of over 5 million square kilometers, an empire that stretched from the misty forests of Germania to the burning sands of Egypt. You could ask how? Through a carefully structured, relentlessly efficient intelligence system, quiet, precise, and terrifyingly effective. The shadow before the legion. Roman military intelligence wasn't some accidental byproduct of war. It was baked into every campaign. When a Roman general marched into enemy territory, he didn't just march blindly. Scouts, called explorators, were already far ahead, blending into landscapes, listening, observing. They didn't wear glittering armor like the soldiers behind them. They moved lightly, spoke little, and returned with gold information. An explorator could tell you the location of a rival force, the depth of a river crossing, or how many days it would take for the enemy to mobilize. Their reports were as valuable as any legend. A mistake in scouting meant thousands of dead. A good report meant victory. They didn't work alone. A second class of operatives called speculators emerged. Roman military spies, often embedded in foreign lands. If the explorators watched the frontiers, the speculators watched the heart of kingdoms. They slipped into cities disguised as merchants, servants, even entertainers. Their job to bring back whispers. The architecture of information. The Roman legends were like a machine, but that machine had a brain. Intelligence was not just collected, it was organized. In every major campaign, intelligence flowed toward the praetorium, the commander's tent. This tent was more than a command post, it was an intelligence center. Scouts returned to it. Messengers from allied tribes came here, captured the deserters and prisoners were interrogated here. Maps were drawn, updated, revised daily. Roman officers kept a constant flow of so-called nuntii, that is, runners, to relay intelligence between units. The empire itself was laced with a cursus publicus, a state-run courier system. Messages could travel from Germania to Rome in a matter of days, not months. A well-oiled relay of horses, stations, and riders ensured that the emperor could know about a revolt on the Rhine while eating figs on the Palatine. And then came the beacons on high ridges across the empire. Signal fires and smoke relays passed simple but critical messages at lightning speed. An enemy incursion, a rebellion, or an approaching legion could be signaled across hundreds of kilometers. No telegraph, no fiber optics, just the ruthless efficiency of Roman logistics. Okay, now let's talk about deception as weapon. Intelligence is not just about what you know, it's about what the enemy thinks they know. In other words, you gotta put to yourself to the enemy's perspective. And the Romans mastered the art of disinformation centuries before the war existed. Before the decisive campaign in Gaul, Julius Caesar would deliberately spread rumors about his army's movements. Messengers accidentally so-called captured would give enemies misleading numbers. Camps were built and abandoned to suggest a different direction. Troops were made to march at night to appear larger, or torches were doubled to make their columns seem endless. And one of the most chilling tricks used by Roman intelligence is bribery. Roman agents infiltrated enemy ranks not always with knives but with gold. A single well-placed bribe could collapse an alliance or deliver a city gate. There's a Roman proverb from the period which sounds like a pecunia vincit hostem, if I read this shit correctly. It means money conquers the enemy, which is still, actual, makes sense. Interrogations and broken tongues. The Roman army treated prisoners not as trophies but as information mines. Captured scouts, deserters, and merchants were interrogated ruthlessly. Roman officers believed the most valuable intelligence came from fear, not loyalty. They used interpreters, scribes, and informants to extract every scrap of information. The number of enemy cavalry, the strength of their supply lines, the morale of their troops. Sometimes they would release captives deliberately, knowing they would carry back false intelligence the Romans had fed them. So, in other words, they intentionally were feeding misinformation. And Rome's intelligence was not just about collecting truth, it was about weaponizing lies. Because the most important goal during the war to make your enemy anxious and in a chaos, so they don't know what exactly you're doing. Networks in the dark. The empire didn't rely on a random luck for its sources. It built networks. Allied tribes supplied information in exchange for protection or wealth. Merchants, those quiet, unremarkable figures who moved between cities, became some of the empire's best informants. Roman officials cultivated this network with bribes, favors, and threats. Inside the empire, Roman governors maintained informant systems known as frumentarii, if I read this correctly. Originally grain officers, later turned into intelligence collectors and, in many cases, secret police. These men were everywhere, inns, taverns, ports, temples. Their presence alone kept potential rebels uneasy, and you never quite knew who was listening. The frumentarians were directly to the emperor's bureaucracy. They were the whisperers of power. By the 2nd century CE, they evolved into something like an early intelligence agency, monitoring political dissent, tracking movements of foreign envoys, reporting directly to Rome. The Emperor's shadow agents. No story of Roman intelligence is complete without the Emperor's private network. Under Augustus, a more systematic approach began. He understood something every great ruler eventually learns. Power lives or dies by information. Augustus created a personal courier and intelligence network that bypassed the Senate entirely. Trusted freedmen and equestrians became his secret eyes. Later emperors took it further. Hadrian, a man obsessed with control, expanded surveillance networks. The imperial service blurred the line between military intelligence and political espionage. Senators, generals, foreign kings, everyone could be watched. And then came Diocletian and Constantine the Great, who formalized aspects of this system into the Agentes in Rebus, so-called men involved in affairs. It's like translation. And these were not merely scouts. They were like elite imperial couriers, inspectors, and spies rolled into one, and they reported directly to the Magister Officiorum. It means like master of officers, one of the most powerful men in the empire. And their job was not just gathering intelligence on the frontier. It was keeping the empire under a constant invisible watch. Campaigns won in silence. History remembers battles, the clash of swords at a battle of Alesia, the dust at a battle of Pharsalus. But behind each decisive moment, there was an intelligence operation. Take Caesar's campaign against Vercingetorix. The Gallic leader believed he could starve out the Romans at Alesia. He had the numbers, the fortifications, the confidence, but Caesar had intelligence. He knew about the Gallic relief army in advance. He built double fortifications, one facing in, one facing out, because someone had told him what was coming. A spy network embedded in Gaul gave him a tactical edge that crushed a massive rebellion in one stroke. Or consider Battle of Teutoburg Forest in 9 CE, a Roman intelligence failure that cost 3 legions their lives. The Romans trusted a local chieftain, Arminius, who was secretly orchestrating an ambush. No scouts warned of the trap, no spies caught the betrayal. Intelligence failed, and the empire bled. Teutoburg became a dark lesson burned into Roman memory. Without intelligence, even Rome could die. So, let's talk about Rome's quiet superpower. People talk about Roman roads, aqueducts, and armies, but intelligence was their quiet super weapon. It wasn't glamorous. There were no a statue of scouts in the forum, but without those shadowy figures, Rome would never have lasted. Information let them move faster, strike smarter, hold power longer. Their empire was not just built on stone and iron, but on whispers carried through forest, desert, and across the sea. And their methods, interrogation, infiltration, like a signal relays in misinformation campaigns, echo eerily in modern intelligence practice. For example, today's agencies speak of human intelligence and SIGINT, it means signal intelligence. The Romans didn't have satellites, but they had rides and beacons. They didn't have encrypted servers, but they had trusted informants and imperial couriers. When modern generals talk about, so-called situational awareness, they echoing something Roman like commanders practiced 2,000 years ago. The price of omniscience. But intelligence has a dark edge. By the late Empire, Rome was suffocating under its own surveillance network. The frumentari, so-called, it's a Roman term, I guess, once efficient informants became feared secret police, extorting the population. Spies turned neighbors against each other. The emperor's eyes were everywhere, and the Senate became a stage of whispers and betrayal. When the empire fractured, its intelligence network fractured too. Some agents went rogue, some defected, some disappeared into the shadows of the collapsing West. But their methods didn't vanish. They were inherited, absorbed, reimagined by Byzantines, like medieval kingdoms, and eventually modern states. Rome fell, but the Roman art of intelligence lived on. So, as an epilogue, let's talk about the empire of whispers in general. Pictured again, a night on the frontier, a small fire flickers in a Roman outpost. A scout returns, his horse breathing hard, carrying a scrap of information that will change tomorrow's battle. The commander listens. He doesn't shout, he nods. Orders ripple down the line. 100,000 soldiers will move tomorrow based on what one man saw tonight. That was the Roman way. Victory wasn't born on the battlefield, it was born in silence, carried on horseback, whispered through the empire. And that's again, in a modern term, it's all about information superiority when you know more than your enemy. And that is why centuries later, long after their legions have turned to dust, the Roman intelligence machine is still studied, not because it had the most brutal soldiers, but because it had the sharpest eyes. And thank you for listening. If you like this story, smash the like button, subscribe button. See you next time.